I'm one of those really nerdy people. I love to learn things. And so whenever I go to a new city, I take all the bus tours and I hop on the tour buses where you have somebody giving you all sorts of facts and information about all the places that you visit while you're there. And I thought it would be interesting to share just a couple of highlights from the trip, show you guys some great pictures, and also share with you some really cool information about the city of San Francisco that I don't think most people know about the city. This was actually my view from the hotel. And what's really interesting about this area, so you can see the bay. Right behind this ridge is the Golden Gate Bridge and the opening to the Pacific Ocean. This whole area here is actually the financial district. Chinatown is back here. North Beach is up here. North Beach is what they call Little Italy in San Francisco. They don't call it Little Italy, it's North Beach. Don't ask me why. They decided to be different and unique. But one thing that's really interesting about this area is all of this area that's flat. This doesn't look like the quintessential San Francisco that you see in the movies. This looks like any other city. And a big part of the reason for that is all of this land is over landfill. It was all filled in so they could build this whole section of the city. And what they actually did, they built this during the gold rush. And it's built over 30 different massive ships. The reason for that is during the gold rush, there were so many sailors that were abandoning ship to go and join the gold rush and become miners that they had all these abandoned ships as materials to work with. So they just put them underneath the city and built right over them. Another thing that I thought was really cool about this is the captains actually paid bartenders to bring drunk sailors back to the ships after a night of drinking. And then the ships would depart for Shanghai, which was a major trade partner with the city at the time. And that's where the term getting Shanghaied comes from. They actually, they actually would put these sailors on boats so that they couldn't run off to join the gold rush and they couldn't abandon ship and they could keep trade routes going. I thought that was a pretty wild thing. The gold rush, who'd have thunk? Imagine the kerfuffle. All right, let me see here if I can go to the next slide. There we go. This, I imagine, is what more people think of as being quintessentially San Francisco. These are all these colorful houses, very close together, no yards. Don't be fooled. I know these look very, very small, but these houses are in the Haight-Ashbury district up in the hills of San Francisco. Any of these houses will cost you a minimum of $2 million. They are incredibly expensive pieces of real estate, but they're very colorful. They make for a great tourist attraction. And the Haight-Ashbury district is actually the hippie center of the city. It's where they had that whole Jimi Hendrix, Santana, wear flowers in your hair movement in the city. And it's really shaped the culture of the city even now. Now it's a place where you go for thrift shopping and vintage shops and all kinds of cool things like that. It's really a millennial's dream section of the city. I did have to point these out. Notice I'll try to work in a couple of pictures of food here and there. But these pictures here are from the Botanical Gardens and from the Japanese tea garden. They're right outside of Golden Gate Park. Golden Gate Park is one of the biggest parks in the whole city. It spans a huge section of San Francisco. And one of the coolest things that I learned about it is the gentleman that built and designed the park actually scoured the world, and he brought over 200 varieties of plants and trees that are not native to San Francisco or not native to the Bay Area, so that when people visit this park, they're going to see plants and trees from all over the world. And it's an incredibly diverse place in terms of plant life. Botanical Gardens are beautiful. The Japanese tea garden, you can see how beautiful and peaceful this is. They're right outside Head Park. They're right next to the Academy of Sciences, and right up the way is Tartine, one of San Francisco's most famous bakeries. I would pit this chocolate croissant here above any or against any chocolate croissant that I've had in Paris, where I have been before. Cool thing to do when you visit the city. I loved this trip. This was really cool. Right outside of San Francisco, you cross the Golden Gate Bridge and you see all of these really tall 200-300 foot redwood trees that this area is famous for. You can see this is a normal sized woman right here and her probably 5-year-old kid who was so excited, and he tried to count all of the teeny tiny little lines on this tree to count just how old it is. I don't think he actually got there, but this is how huge these trees are. They're as wide as we are tall. And one thing that I thought was really interesting is everyone thinks Muir Woods is a national park. The reason it's actually a national monument is because when they were going to turn it in, years and years ago, just before they were going to turn this into a monument, there was a gentleman named Keller who owned the land, and there was a gentleman that he recruited named John Muir, and they went up against the city of San Francisco who wanted to build on this land. They wanted to create a reservoir. They wanted to tear down all these trees and do all this damage to the land. And so John Muir approached President Franklin Roosevelt, and Roosevelt said, I can't make it a national park, go through Congress, go through all the process of making something a national park before the city of San Francisco starts building on this land. But in that last year, there was a piece of legislature that passed that allowed a president to make anything a national monument without congressional approval. So he made Muir Woods a national monument right away, and that stopped any destruction from happening to land. And now it's this beautiful park where you can walk through all of this space. And actually, the reason that you have paths like this is actually a bridge. It's no more than 5 inches off the ground. The reason they built the park like this is because redwood trees have a really shallow root system. So if people walk on paths all over the tree roots, it actually damages the trees, kills the trees, and encourages them to fall over. So it's another part of protecting the redwood trees. It's just a really cool, beautiful place, and it's something I encourage everyone to do. It's maybe a 20-minute trip outside of San Francisco. I bet you guys are waiting for me to talk about the Golden Gate Bridge. I actually this is a catamaran, which is a boat that has kind of 2 canoes, and then there's netting in between, and it's got a great big sail, and that's how you sail along the bay. The bay only gets to about 55 degrees. That's how cold the water is. And so it gets really cold on the water with all this wind coming off the Pacific Ocean every night. But I will say it was so interesting going over the bridge. I didn't realize that the bridge is over 340 feet of water. That's why it was such a marvel to build it. Plus, with all the winds coming off of the Pacific Ocean, they actually built the bridge that it sways a full 11 feet in either direction. And that's part of the reason that it's so successful and that it stays upright all the time. The other thing that was so quintessential about the bridge is its color. It's that orange color. They actually have a team of 32 painters that are constantly sandblasting and repainting the bridge. The color is international orange. It takes them 4 years to paint the bridge. And as soon as they finish, they have to start over again. It's a constant job to keep it that color. And the reason they do it is because it's such an iconic, quintessential piece of the San Francisco skyline that they want to keep it that same color from year to year to year. This was probably my favorite part of the whole trip, I will say. This was a trip out to Yosemite National Park. It's about a 3-hour drive outside of San Francisco. This, all way back in the background behind me, looks a lot smaller than it is because of how far away I actually am from these mountains or from these cliffs. Yosemite is the size of Rhode Island. Like, the park is just huge. I spent a full 16-hour day in Yosemite, and everything is just so picturesque. It's so beautiful. It's so peaceful. You have birds, you have bears, which is really cool. You have bobcats, everything. It's like stepping into another world. This actually was one of the coolest things to get to see. This is the famous El Capitan. It's just a sheer cliff. It's the largest hunk of one mass of granite in the whole country. And it's the king of kings of all rock climbing walls on the planet. People come from all over the world to try and climb this El Capitan. While we were there, we got to see one rock climber, and you have to look at El Capitan from a mile away with binoculars because they're these little teeny tiny specks on the mountain. That's how big it is. El Capitan is the size of 3 Empire State Buildings. You don't realize how massive that is until you're standing right beneath it. You feel so incredibly small, but it's such a beautiful place. Everything is so clean. I didn't have any problem with the haze from the wildfires. I couldn't believe it. And this was another really interesting thing. You see all this beautiful, fresh, clean water. San Francisco has one of the cleanest, safest drinking waters in the country because they get all of their drinking water from just outside of Yosemite. All water that fuels San Francisco actually goes down a pipeline from outside of Yosemite. And so all the water that comes off as runoff in the mountains and all this beautiful, fresh, clean spring water is what fuels the city. Blows my mind. Such a cool thing. Beautiful place. Go there if you have the opportunity. And this was my last day in San Francisco. I spent a day touring Napa Valley and Sonoma and going to all these different vineyards to learn about wine. And I thought I would give you guys a couple, not just interesting facts, but things that are actually helpful to you next time you go to buy wine at the grocery store, which, according to some of your introductions, I assume will be this Friday. So all of these grapes, I mean, it's so interesting because you don't think about grapevines as lasting a very long time, but there are grapevines that will yield a good crop of grapes for 50, 60 years. And then they start to yield fewer and fewer grapes, but they will still yield a really intense sweet product. So there are some grapes that will stay, or grapevines that will stay around for 75, 100 years. It all depends on what the farmer is trying to produce. I had never thought of wine as something that was produced by agriculture, but all of these different vineyards talked about these grapes as being their crop and how the production of the grape actually results in really good wine. California's had 30% of their regular rainfall this year. Blows my mind. And it's apparently really problematic for most of the farmers in the state. I mean, California produces 90% of all the almonds that we produce in the country. And it takes 10 gallons of water to produce one almond. So they're having all kinds of battles with the city over what kind of water they can use. Well, these wine growers or these grape growers are having a wonderful time because grapevines have really deep root systems and they produce more fruit if you starve them for water, because the more water that's in a grape makes it a less intense, a less sweet, just a more watered down fruit, and it doesn't make for as good of a wine. And so the wine they're producing right now is really exceptional. It's a really great time to buy California wine. Heads up, just a thought. But the other things that I learned while I was on the tour, I got to go and actually see the whole facilities where they make the wine. So all of these barrels, it's so interesting. I had never thought about the wood in a barrel as being part of the winemaking process. They actually act like a tea bag. So if you have a young barrel, a barrel that's never been used before, it's going to impart more of a woodsy and oaky flavor on the wine that it produces. Whereas the older the barrel is, the more it's been used, it's like a tea bag that's already been used before. So winemakers that will have older, more experienced barrels that have been through years and years and years of making wine, they'll have a different flavor every time they produce that wine. Blows my mind, something interesting to learn. So whenever you have an oaky Chardonnay, it's been made in a very young wooden barrel. I also learned that if you drink wine, you're not supposed to hold it from the glass, you hold it from the stem, because the heat from your hands will actually affect the temperature of the wine while you're drinking it, and it affects the flavor. I also learned that if you go to smell a wine, they tell you you're supposed to smell the bouquet of the wine, all these wine snobs talk like that. You smell from the top of the glass, not the bottom. I have no idea how this works, but it does. If you smell from the bottom of the glass, you only smell the alcohol. If you smell from the top of the glass, you smell all of the fruity, floral, textural, flavoral notes of the wine. And so you're supposed to smell from the top of the glass before you drink. The other thing I learned that I thought would be helpful to everybody is how there are sweet wines and how there are dry wines, and how you know which is which. Because I personally go to the wine store and I look at a label and I think, oh, that has a kangaroo. That looks like fun. Sure. But if you look at the back of a wine label, all wines are going to give you the percentage of alcohol in a wine. And the higher the percentage of alcohol, the drier the wine is going to be. So if you're looking at 2 or 3 different wines and you turn the labels around and you see these wines have 13 to 15% alcohol content, they're going to be a drier wine, versus a wine that has a 6 to 10% alcohol content, and they're going to be sweet. And that's how when you go to purchase wine for your meals, you know what it is that you're actually getting in terms of dryness versus sweetness for the meals that you're going to have. I thought that was a cool thing to learn. It was a really wild experience, very educational, I tell you what. And the wine wasn't bad, so that was helpful too. I hope that this has been fun for you guys. This is such a short synopsis of the entire trip. It was really incredible. I was there for a whole 7 days, and I'd never been to the Bay Area before. So it was a really exciting and new and interesting place to be. And I would absolutely recommend a trip there to anybody that's interested. So have a wonderful rest of your day, you guys. Thank you so much for listening to me. Back to you, Mr. Toastmaster.